So it's 26th of August, 2025, and the Hassall Family History Association today is having a presentation by John Brooks about Jonathan Hassall and Mary Rouse and family. And we really look forward to what you've got to share with us this time around, John. So over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Look, I'd like tonight to talk about four different related aspects of that come up from looking at the Jonathan line. The first of them is digging into the Rouse family. The second is to have a look at two of Jonathan's broods as people. And the third is to, in the words of Gilbert and Sullivan, to have a look at the sisters and the cousins of the aunts of mine. And there's a fourth, which I'll come to. But Richard Rouse is interesting, and he was the first stop on our tour of Windsor in June for a couple of reasons. One, he is my great-great-great-grandfather, as is Roland. So he's worth more than a mention in the Jonathan line. He is part of the beginning of the Jonathan line, and he was interesting. He was one of the interesting people that seems to be lost. He was a free settler. He was born in 1774 and came out here in 1801, arrived in Sydney, as a free settler with a wife and two small children. And Governor Gidley King gave him 100 acres out in North Richmond, where he established himself as quite a good farmer, to the point where he was liked, and he was appointed the superintendent of the lumber yard, which was, I guess, a big deal. But he moved in to a small house opposite the gates of Government House in Parramatta, leaving a supervisor on the farm. He was quite active, but in 1806, he welcomed William Bligh as governor. Thought, terrific, this bloke will get the Rum Corps under control. And he was one of these really staunch supporters. He signed lots of notes, and Bligh wanted him as a witness to take to England. That fell through. The loyalty cost Ralph. There's hints of Donald Trump in this. Because he supported Bligh, he was chucked out. He was no longer a public servant. So he went back to the farm, where he was quite successful. And then when Governor Macquarie came in, he saw the advantages of Rouse. And in 1814, he was appointed superintendent of carpenters, which meant he was in charge of the builders, the convict builders in the Parramatta-Windsor area. And he superintended a lot of the construction of buildings and toll houses and turnpikes, and including the reconstruction of Government House in Parramatta and the creation of the Parramatta Hospital. He was granted by Macquarie 450 acres near the site. This is a matter of contention, near the site of the Battle of Vinegar Hill. Now, if you want an argument, go out into Windsor and say this is where the Battle of Vinegar Hill was. The Rouse Hill Farm has it noted there. Robert Hughes, in his book, The Fatal Shore, has it somewhere else with a mention of an interfering padre called Hassall. The Windsor Society has it up somewhere else. It's one of those things. But it took a while to build the house. It's a beautiful house, and two rooms, and they've been occupied by the Rouse family ever since. Now, I'm going to show you some of it. Just a moment. And if this works, I'll find things. Okay. That is Rouse Hill House. as it was. You can't see it at the moment. They're reconstructing it. And it's a lovely house. It's big, 2 stories. You can see very, very carefully constructed. But then he was in charge of all the builders in the place, so you'd expect the place to be well built. Just to get back, if I show you something else there, um, nope, sorry, if I scroll up, no, sorry, Mary, this is not. I'd like to. Oh, ah, that is a picture of the interior. It is classic 19th century clutter, and it is being redone at the moment, and it will go back to that. To go inside, you have to have little things put on your feet, but it is conducted and it's free. You can get in there, well, you will be able to get in there. But it's a lovely picture of what life was in the 19th century, not necessarily when they first moved in, but it's worth a look. There's the house. And I've checked. They're still not too sure when it'll be open, but you can go out there any Sunday, and it is free. It's run by Living Museums New South Wales. It used to be historic houses. Um, but can I get back to Zoom? How do I get back to Zoom, Graham? I'm lost.
Yes,
Oh no, it's okay.
just do the stop
Okay,
share.
got
That's
it,
it.
got it, got it, got it, got
Yep.
it.
You're on the right track.
Yes, yes. I learned, Mr. Faulty, I learned. Um, but it's been in the family ever since. It belonged to it was passed down to the. But in 1813, of course, Blackstone, Donaldson, and Wentworth crossed the mountains. And then once they'd built a road there, Macquarie had built a road, they started pouring over there. In 1822, he sent his sons in search of good pasturage in the area, northwest of the Blue Mountains. Uh, and in 1825, they took up land 90 miles north of Bathurst on the Cudgegong River, which is near Gulgong, which had recently been, it wasn't they were doing it off the bat, it had been recently relinquished by George and Henry Cox because of the hostility of the Aboriginal population there. They were able to control that. But this was a grant of 4,000 acres, which was big stuff. And it was gradually increased, and it became 2 stations, which were inherited by Edwin and George, and both properties prospered, and the Rouses were connected with progressive movements of the towns of Mudgee and Gulgong for many years. Rouse also acquired properties on the Castle Ray, near Wellington, and as well as the properties at Penrith and Richmond. And by 1828, he owned 10,000 acres. And that was really big stuff. Then he retired to Rouse Hill. After Jonathan and Mary lived there, but after Jonathan's death, he built a house for Mary at Berkshire Park, which is just south of Windsor. It's all in the same, what I call the Jonathan area, and helped her in looking after the children, her children. And one of his grandchildren was Richard James Hassall, my great-grandfather, because he was one of Jonathan's children. And Richard seems to have led a remarkable but a steady life. But it closes sort of one loop in the family. And he was given land by Richard Rouse at what's called Morawalga in the Mudgee district, which he farmed successfully, and he built a home. Let me show the home. Nope. Oh, I'm lost. Bear with me. There it is. That's Morawalga today. And this is a look at how tough things were. That's classic slab and tin roof. This is Henry Lawson and the drover's wife and all this. It's not a flash house like Rouse Hill. It's a farmer's life, a farmer's house in the very early 1800s. That's my great niece there, Lily. It's still there, but it's, I don't know if you know Fiddler on the Roof, where he talks about a fine tin house with a fine tin roof and real wooden floors below. They didn't have wooden floors. They did have windows. That was quite a big thing. But that gives you a look at how things were tough. He raised a family of 6 children there, and it's still there. But it takes you back. And this is some of the difference between history and heritage. Heritage is what's built. It gives you a feeling for it. You can write all the words you like about it, but that's a picture that says life was tough. Anyway, he was successful. He prospered. And he was able to build a good farming community out there. Meanwhile, Richard Rouse at Rouse Hill devoted his time to raising sheep and cattle. He was breeding thoroughbred horses, managing various properties. And he really was the type of pioneer that the colony needed. He and Rowland. He was a family man. He was a loyal member of the Church of England, hardworking, honest, a very efficient grazier. And his children survived. Mary, of course, married Jonathan. Yes. Jane, who was the next one, married Alfred Kennelly, who became Premier of Tasmania. Eleanor married the first John Terry, and the Terry family have gradually taken over and eventually passed it across to the New South Wales government. And George was one of the first boys enrolled at the King's School in Parramatta. Richard Griffiths, there are crayon drawings of Richard and Elizabeth Rouse, both aged in their 73s, still in Rouse Hill. When it reopens, you'll be able to see that. Richard died in 1852. He's buried in the vault at St. Peter's Church at Richmond. But with Rowland, the two of them, they were the same generation. They were there as an important part of the growing colony. And they are very important people in the history of Australia. And I think I'd like to see them recognised. And they're both my great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers. As I said, Rouse Hill is being refurbished by New South Wales Living Museums. I checked them yesterday. It's still not open. And, I'll keep track of that and I'll let everybody know when they're open. But it's a Sunday out there and it's free and it's easy to get to. If you're in Sydney, you take the metro. So that's Richard Rouse. He's a very interesting man. And that's why in our tour, we went to Rouse Hill first. Pity it wasn't open. Okay, next. Any questions about that before I move on to the next bit of this?
Yeah, John, Peter Voss. I have a question. Yeah. There's a property, a colonial property called Guntawang on the Cudgewong River outside of Mudgee, and I think it was Rouse's property.
Yes, Guntawang, yeah. Guntawang and Viragambel.
But Guntawang is a very important historic property. beautiful homestead. I think the land it's not as big as it used to be, but I think that's. Can you just describe how it fits with Rouse?
Anyway,
Yeah.
they this is what they got from the Cox brothers. They took up land there because the Coxes wanted to get out because they were having too much trouble with the Aborigines. And this is a time when land changed hands very easily without, pretty well without the much recognition. So I don't know quite what the arrangement was, whether money changed hands or whether the Cox brothers said, look, have it, let's go. But they were the two properties he bequeathed to his sons, lost their names, but Edwin and George, that's right. I don't know which one got who, but that's all part of the thing. That there was a time when land was just given or taken, depending which side you look at. But in this case, the Coxes wanted to get out. But I have not been there. I must in some time. Okay.
It's a huge house, colonial house. It's very important, I think. But I don't know whether Rouse built it or
I know we've got a couple of 100 years to do it.
Yeah.
So lots of. I mean, look at Denby. Sorry. I don't. It's been developed, and there was a time Rouse, of course, had all these carpenters and free labour. It was a good time to build a house. Up there, Richard didn't. He was hacking out a block of land. No, read your Henry Lawson. Okay. Sorry, any other questions?
John, I've got questions, but I also want to see what else you've got to share with us. So I'll just ask one question. Is there a decent biography of Richard Rouse?
Oh, there are several. If you go on the net, you can find them. I've pulled a lot of it from this. But you're probably going back through the Terrys. They're the latest one. Ken Terry was the managing director of the Dimmicks chain. In fact, my wife worked for him. I've met him, but they're all part of that thing. The historic houses, in terms of in terms of Rouse Hill Farm, have quite a good history of it. That's all part of it.
Look, I won't ask more now. I think it'd be great if you just can carry on and share what else you have to share with us.
Okay, I'm moving on now just to Jonathan's brood. There are quite a few of them, but there are two that that's the eldest, and it was Jonathan. It was Roland, sorry, who is recognised as a pioneer of the Braidwood district down near Yass, where a lot of my cousins are. And if you read it, says he's a horse breeder with Tom Roberts, and owned Archer that won the first and second Melbourne Cups in 1861 and 62. Well, first Melbourne Cup wasn't a cup, it was a watch. Then it was a gold watch. But therein lies the tale. Archer may have been foaled, and here's a comment. The bloodlines of horses are far better recorded than the bloodlines of people. There's a buck in it, so it is. A lot of the horses we're seeing today have bloodlines they can trace back to Arabs hundreds of years ago. Anyway, Archer may have been foaled on Thomas Royd's cattle farm, Balabar, which was owned by Roland Hassall. Royds died quite young at 27 in an accident, and 2 years later, Roland, perhaps opportunistically, married his widow, Betsy Royds, who was born Betsy Roberts. And under the laws of the time, he obtained actually all of Betsy's possessions in the marriage. They were the rules of the game then. And even though Royd's will gave him the right to do so, Roland began selling off some of the Royd's horses at Exeter Farm, but Betsy persuaded him to hang on to a couple of an important stallion, William Tell, and 6 brood mares, and her brother Tom Roberts, who'd inherited the Exeter Farm, who was executor of Royd's estate, was trying to persuade Roland to hold back, because some of it in part of the will went to his nephews. As part of the agreement, the progeny, including Archer from the breeding program, were recorded in the stud books under the breeding partnership name of Hassall and Roberts. The name of the 2 boys were left out. The boys finally sued their stepfather in 1870, and their interests were finally recognised. They said, we have an interest in this. The breeding partnership was renamed as Hassall, Roberts and Royds. So when you look back at claims of who owned the first winner of the Melbourne Cup, yes, Roland Hassall had part of it, but it's a bigger story than that. He did own a horse called Tim Whiffler, which won the Cup in 1867. But it's a thing for Andrew Hassall. If Andrew, last time we saw him, was trying to persuade us to put up a Hassall Cup for the Melbourne Cup next year. If he tries to sell them to any of the Royds, they'll throw him back saying you're a horse thief. So it's an interesting part of the family. It almost equates with the missionaries going back and trading guns with the people in the islands. They were tough times. Not at all. The second member of the Jonathan's brood, who I read and weep, was, who was it used? I've always called it Cover, but I noticed somebody called it Cover, but somebody called it Cover. Whatever it is, Mary Cover Hassall. She was one of Jonathan's daughter. She was seen to be a beauty of her day. And she married the Honourable William Walker. It wasn't the Reverend William Walker. He was a solicitor in Windsor. She was his second wife, and he brought 2 children with him. So she was marrying into a family. Mary bore him 2 children, but she died at the age of 29. He then married Henrietta Cooper, who died aged 34, having borne him 8 children. He then had 12 children to look after. Oh. He then married Jessie Wood, who died, leaving him 4 children. So that was a total of 16 children that he had to look after. He was elected to the Legislative Assembly in 1860 and in 1864, and he became Mayor of Windsor, the Windsor Borough Council, in 1878. He is mentioned several times in the Windsor District's history area as a great person. Frankly, I would have turned him over to someone like Miss Marple for investigation. But it does give some insight then to the paucity of obstetric report, support, the education, the sort of social structure in which children were just bred like sheep. I feel great sympathy for poor Mary Cover Hassall. It's one of those things you look at and think, how did they get away? How did people do that? And the answer was, I guess, necessity. That was the norm. And I find Mary's story slightly depressing or distressing. But they're just a couple of the generations. That's what history was. So any comments on those before I go to the third bit, which is my sisters and cousins and aunts?
Well, just on Roland Hassall, and because we have a place in Braidwood where it's steeped in controversy who owned Archer, and
Okay.
One thing I would say, there were 2 small gold cups, and they were in the Royds family, and the Royds family sold them about 10 years ago back to the Jockey Society. So they're now in Melbourne. One very interesting thing about Roland Hassall, which you did mention, is that Braidwood was quite a lawless place. There was a royal commission into lawlessness in Braidwood following the Clark gang murdering 4 constables, special constables, which were sent down to Braidwood to try and capture the Clark gang. And 4 constables were murdered. The Royal Commission found that Roland Hassall, who was a magistrate, and it was an honorary position, was in dereliction of his duty because, for some strange reason, the Clarks never took his cattle or horses. And he gave evidence at the Royal Commission that a strainer post was burnt once, and he attributed that to the Clark gang. But he commenced defamation proceedings in the New South Wales Supreme Court, saying that the Royal Commission was an erroneous finding, and those proceedings failed. And there's a fascinating book by someone called Peter Clark, who has spent about 40 years studying the Clark gang. Peter Smith, I should say, is the author. And the whole court case and all the toings and froings are dealt with in great detail in that book. So there's some snippets about the Braidwood Hassalls.
This is history. Once you start digging, you think, I better stop. If you go, I go back into my own family, the Brooks lot. They were strange. Okay. Any others? Any other comments? Otherwise,
I'm just going to make one comment that your story about Mary Cover is echoed by the story of Eliza Cordelia Hassall, who married Walker. And that story will be told in October when we look at that family line. 6 kids died at the age of 30 out, in the plains near Bathurst. What a tough life this lady lived. And I think one of the things we're doing recently in our family history is just really bringing to light the stories, not only of the men, but of the women and of the families. So I appreciate what you're doing tonight by bringing to light the second and third generations and how it was for them. So thanks very much, John.
Good. Thanks. Let me go on to then some people I actually knew, which is the next generation, which is Richard's son, Jonathan Evans Hassall. He's my grandfather. It appears that somewhere there in the family, some respect for Evans. I think it's Surveyor Evans, because grandfather was a surveyor. He was in fact, he's Jonathan Evans Hassall. My mother was Jean Evans Hassall. But we've searched it and we can't find it. They're not where they may pop up somewhere else. And if they can, then finds an Evans. But I think it's a surveyor Evans who goes right back into the beginnings of the. But his obituary in the Sydney Morning Herald in 1941 says the deaths occurred at the age of 84 of Jonathan Evans Hassall. As a young man, he entered the survey branch of the Department of Lands. He was draftsman in charge of the Grafton Lands Office. From Grafton, he went to Armidale and then to Tamworth. He held high offices in the department until his appointment to Tamworth as chairman of the Lands Board. So that was a pretty important part up there. And that part of my family, we all regard as Northern Rivers people. They grew up in Tamworth and Grafton, and my mum grew up in Grafton. And he had 6 children who I could talk about. His first was my Uncle Bruce. He married a Auntie Bell in the USA. He had 2 children, Joan and John. John and I, my cousin John and I, he was about 10 years older than me, we share a common bond in that we are the only 2 who weren't christened Jonathan. My mum said, I'm not going to have a child called Jonathan. There were too many of them. John was a lovely bloke, and my wife, who nursed at Royal Prince Alfred, said that all her friends thought he was wonderful. He was medical superintendent of Royal Prince Alfred, so he had some sort of status, but he was a nice bloke. The next one was Enid. He married David Lobban, who was a solicitor in Grafton. And they had a lovely house on the banks of the Clarence. They had 2 children. The third was Richard, my Uncle Richard. He married twice, but they had no children. The fourth was Edgar Hassall, who died young. The fifth of the children was my Uncle Donald Wilfred Hassall, who committed the appalling sin of marrying Annie McGorran, who was a lovely, black-haired, blue-eyed Roman Catholic Irish. She was wonderful. But they got over that. That was not a problem. They lived in Grafton, had 3 children, Mark, Nanette, and Jonathan, who was about my age, who died. Mark was a great athlete, and he and Jonathan were a very important part of the Yamba community, and are written up, don't have it, as being participant in a very important surf lifesaving there that took place. Mark was an accountant, went to Melbourne, had a son who Rowley and Hassall will tell you played for Hawthorn and then played for Collingwood, which was a terrible thing to do in Melbourne. But he is now a horse breeder. I'm still trying to track him down. And then the lastly, my mother, Jean Evans Hassall, who married George Patrick Brooks. And if you're talking about him, please make that Patrick with 2 T's. Patrick with 1 T is church. Patrick with 2 T's is chapel. And the Patricks settled and developed the Cooma Monero. Up in the bookcase behind me, there's a whole lot of stuff on the chapels, the Patricks. And I will do a share here. And that's 3 generations. That is Jonathan Evans Hassall, Jean Evans Brooks, and my brother Peter. Circa about 1938, as far as I can see. But one of the things about it is there is a wealth of stuff around about then through to the 1950s of street photographers in Sydney. they used to pop up everywhere when you was in town and take your picture. And there is this enormous, there's still some of them around there, that record the history of Sydney, especially the middle of Sydney. Mother's either been to a very enjoyable funeral or black is the big in thing there. But you can look at these and they will tell you an awful lot. That Circular Quay, that building has gone. Angel Street is still there. Yeah, there are tram lines there then. There are tram lines there now. But these pictures of your forebears and immediate forebears are wonderful stuff. I've got another one which I won't show you of my mother and my sister and me a little bit later. But this is stuff worth chasing. But the other thing about that, with that look at that generation that I've been talking to you, is the social change. Not all of those women. My mum was born in 1903. So all those women were born in the 19th century. Not one of them had more than 3 children. That is an extraordinary social change, if you think about it. It talks about better education, better medical provision, and it gives you a look at how the country is developed, how society developed, and there's probably a fair bit of economics in that, and also a lot of those women were having their children during the First World War. So there are all sorts of things taking place when you look at just a family that are worth looking at and worth thinking about. It's not just the writing down of it that's important, but what is it saying to you? And that says to me that's a picture of extraordinary social change when you look back at the families of 10s and 8s and 6s, most of who died. Not one of them died. So there's a picture of change, of great change and desirable change that you look at when you see when you look at the history. And I want to go into one more thing. As you will have seen in our trip around Windsor, Jonathan's grave is a horrible looking thing. It's a mess. And I'd like to see how we can refurbish that. I don't know. I've talked to Rowley Hassall about what they did to James' grave in Victoria. But what I'd like to do is for us to take on some sort of project to restore that grave and bring it back to at least readable, because it's almost impossible to read. And there's a lot to do if you do that. Firstly, of course, we've got to get the approval of the church and the custodians of the graveyard. I'm concerned about that. It's not the sort of thing I was thinking, do we get a karcher for the weekend and go out and spray stuff on it? I don't know how robust the sandstone is after all these years. We might take all the stuff off it. We might take all the engraving off it. So I would like to see us as a group look at how we restore that, take that on as a project to restore it. I think it's worth doing. I think there are so many graves around the country. There are some of Richard up at Morawalga that are in reasonably good condition, but they're vertical. The stone on the gravestone is vertical, and therefore you don't get things resting on it and growing. So that's something, just to end this off, I'd like to end on the sort of, what do we do now? I think Victorians, I've started talking to Rowley about, they've done a good job on James's. I think we need to plan, get the approvals, budget, fund to set up a project to restore Jonathan and Mary's grave, because they're there together. So that's my presentation for the evening. Where do we go
Thank
from
you,
here?
John.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
thank you.
Very much.
Very good. Very interesting.
Thank you
I mean,
indeed,
I'd
John.
like to support, your proposal to do something with Jonathan and Mary's grave.
You saw it.
Tour.
We got a picture of you there with it.
Yeah, on the tour, I spoke to one of the historical society guides, and she said that modern restoration means that you don't actually touch the sandstone, you leave it as is, but you put in a brass plate with a transcription of what it says, rather than fiddle with the sandstone itself. But whatever is the best way of dealing with it, I'm very supportive. I think we should do it.
I think that's probably a reason. I don't know what the Victorian one was. That was cleaned up. The engineer in me says I would like to see somebody hop onto that with a karcher and blast it. That's a bit dodgy. So I think if there's a fair bit of research and talking to go on before we do that. But that's one of the good options to do it. And that's what's been done with Roland's grave in Parramatta, isn't it, Jane? Or Alison?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a plaque on it. But Judith Dunn could be a person to give advice on.
She's got the missing bit.
Sorry?
She's got the missing bit.
Oh, yes, but I'm talking about any advice on where to go. There's been plenty of people, including Judith Dunn, on support or advice.
Yeah. And so, I'm happy, yes, to sort of proceed with that and just keep in touch of start doing a few things that moves in that direction. You would have been talking at Windsor probably to Peter Shapley, or who was the secretary, or Jan Barclay Jack, who we're also talking to. So I'm happy to do that, but nothing. Yeah. What else? Where do we go from here?
Well, John, thanks. I think what I might do is I'll stop the recording and we can continue to chat. So once again, thank you for the presentation. Everybody was really delighted with it. We'll stop recording now, and then we'll proceed with just our conversation. So recording is about to stop.
Just for the record, a lot of what I was talking about is in print, and if you want that plus the pictures, I can easily send them to you.